to know his job thoroughly, and was a person who never hankered after another occupation. He knew he was an important part of a great enterprise, for the success of the railway has been the making of India. No other job in India seemed to me to have so much pride and paraphernalia, such a complicated chain of command.
It's Big's wonderful world of shortwave radio.
In the United States and in the Soviet Union on the Trans-Siberian. But in India, there was gentleness and... Radio Praga, Czechoslovakia.
This is a brief introduction to the fascinating world of shortwave radio. We'll be playing you examples of a lot of exotic radio stations, give you some idea of how to recognize them while tuning on your shortwave receiver. And we're going to start by the easiest way I know, as you hear Radio Prague in the background. The easiest way to pick up a shortwave station is to tune around the bands just before the hour, half hour, just before 15 after the hour, and 15 after the hour. And the reason is, a lot of these shortwave stations, nearly all of them as a matter of fact, before they sign on, they broadcast what is known as an interval signal, and we'll be calling it an IS from now on in. Anyway, the IS can either be, well, it usually is a piece of music that is repeated over and over again. And you'll see what I mean by that when we play the whole bunch that we're going to hear tonight, or this morning, or this afternoon, or whenever you're listening to this tape. The interval signal is, like I said, repeating melody usually a little snip of a song. A lot of cases they use snips of the national anthem of the country that's originating the broadcast format, for example. And they just repeat that over and over again, and the time varies. Sometimes, if you're tuning in for a particular station, you will not hear the IS itself until 30 seconds before sign-on time, which is the case with Radio Iran, for example, which is one that only runs the IS 3 or 4 times. On the other hand, you can get one like the Voice of Nigeria, which we shall also hear, that will run for 15-20 minutes prior to sign-on. So let's start with the fabulous continent of Europe, shall we? Europe is where shortwave broadcasting really began back in the 30s or so, and it started with Radio Netherlands, also known as Radio Nederland, in Hilversum, Holland. They were the very first international shortwave broadcasting station. And now they run transmissions. Their studios are still in Hilversum, Holland. They run transmissions from transmitters in Hilversum, Bonaire in the Netherlands, and Antilles down in the Caribbean. Those are the ones that we get here in the United States. They're beamed right at North America, and they come in fairly well. And they also run a Madagascar relay, which I think we'll have some of that IS for you later on. We're going, sort of area by area geographically. So let's hear the Radio Nederland, Radio Netherlands IS.
UTC.
next one we will hear will be Radio Polonia in Warsaw, Poland.
Radio Polonia. Radio Polonia.
For an interlude, here is a special treat, one from South America.
Radio Magallanes, emisora desde la que Salvador Allende dejó al escribir su legado patriótico de unidad, lucha y libertad.
What you're hearing is Radio Bras in Brazil. Now, Ecuador.
You are in tune to the voice of Champions radio station HCJB, broadcasting from Quito, Ecuador. We are transmitting in the English language to North America in the 19-meter band at 15,155 kilohertz and in 31 meters at 9,745 kilohertz. The time is 10:30 p.m. in Quito, Eastern Standard Time, 3:30, coordinated universal time.
listening to a few mixed things here. We'll just give you a brief summary of what you just heard. We started off with a weird interval signal from South America, and I think I just identified it as South America on the tape, but that was actually Radio Magdalene in Colombia. Then we heard, I believe, Radio Brás in Brasilia, Brazil, directed towards North America. Also in there, I believe you heard the Waltzing Matilda interval signal for Radio Australia, and I think we have a little more of that we could play later on when we get country by country. We're just giving a few teasers here. But getting back to Europe, the last one you heard, and the sign-on was Radio Tirana in Tirana, Albania. And let's start to drift back to more of the European stations on Large's wonderful world of shortwave radio.
Shortwave? No, permanent. I bet I can get the Lone Ranger on this. Where's that dumpling head? Hey, let's take a look in here. Hey, what kind of a place is this? Looks like a rogues gallery. Hey, a Schickelgruber. We're in a rat. We gotta find Herbie and get out of here. There ain't a house that's torn up by those workmen. If we see them, we shoot them between the eyes. No, in the back. I promise you today there's destruction of the harbor. Heil! Heal! Harassment of a skunk! Come on, get him! U-29, calling Agent X-43. Oh, stop that double talk. I want to get a Lone Ranger.
Okay, enough levity for a little while. That was the Three Stooges talking about radios. But anyway, we're going to continue our tour of, well, I guess, yeah, it's Europe, part of Europe. Okay, I think the next one we have is the IS from the Voice of Turkey. So stay tuned for that.
This is the Voice of Turkey. This is the Voice of Turkey.
You're hearing interference from Radio Deutsche Welle in Cologne, Germany there. That's the other IS you hear in the background.
This is the Voice of Turkey. 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 This is the voice of Turkey.
Broadcasting from studios in Ankara. Our English language transmissions can be heard every day between 20 and 25 Greenwich Mean Time on 7,155 kilohertz in the 41-meter band beam to Western Europe. Between 22 and 22:50 hours Greenwich Mean Time, we are on the air again on 9,515 kilohertz in the 31-meter band beam to Western Europe, on 9,610 kilohertz in the 31-meter band beam to Middle East, on 11,000...
I should add these frequencies are not necessarily correct, as this was taped some time ago, and they do change frequencies.
9,730 kilohertz in the 31-meter band.
Okay, I believe we have the IS coming up for Radio France International coming up shortly.
Once again on the air on 11,755 kilohertz in the 25-meter band beam to Northeast America, and on 9,670 kilohertz in the 31-meter band beam to Southeast Asia. After the news and the review of the Turkish press, the Voice of Turkey will present you with Newsfield. That will be followed by some songs by Hülya Şener, and finally we have the next corner. But first of all, here is the news.
The Soviet and Federal German foreign ministers will convene in Vienna to discuss the question of nuclear disarmament. The Foreign Minister of the People's Republic of China, Wu Kwai-kung, will arrive in Ankara tomorrow as the official guest of Foreign Minister Rádio Suécia, Estocolmo.
Sorry about that. I thought that was Radio France. That is the Swedish ID.
Shalom y muy buenas noches. Esta es Col Israel, la voz de Israel, transmitiendo desde Jerusalén en ondas cortas por la banda de 25,74 metros, frecuencia de 11.655 kilohertz.
Okay, that was Kol Israel, Radio Israel, in Spanish. We will have an example of them. You didn't hear the IS, just the sign-on. But we will have the IS and sign-on of them in English coming up shortly. And you heard before that a brief excerpt of the Radio Sweden IS, which has changed. We'll have the old and the new one of those. And before that, you heard the Voice of Turkey sign-on in English. Okay, staying in Europe, here's an old sentimental favorite of mine, Radio Prague, Czechoslovakia. Listened to them throughout the years, heard them after they got shut off in '68 when the Russian troops overran them, and I've got a QSL of them from the very day they officially came back on the air. Radio Prague.
is Radio Prague, Czechoslovakia. Radio Prague is on the air for listeners in North America with 27-minute transmission twice each evening.
Okay, our next one is Deutsche Welle, the voice of Germany, and this one's a little unusual as it's Deutsche Welle and their Malta relay station in shortwave listening. Every station, every country you can get counts as a separate country, no matter whether it's just a relay station or not. And a lot of international broadcasting stations use external relay stations, and we'll talk about that a little later on. But anyway, here is the Deutsche Welle.
Deutsche Welle, the voice of Germany. Deutsche Welle, the voice of Germany. This is Radio Deutsche Welle, the voice of Germany.
This is Radio Deutsche Welle, transmitter Malta.
Okay, that was Radio Deutsche Welle and their Malta relay, which is in the Mediterranean. They have one in Montserrat in the Caribbean. They use Radio Canada relay in Sackville, New Brunswick as well. Okay, here's an interesting thing coming up. We haven't heard the IS for Radio Moscow yet, so we're going to hear that now, but this is a really weird one I just happened to stumble across from my collection. It's Radio Moscow IS in the background interfering with the IS for Radio Havana, Cuba. And if you listen to the very beginning, you'll hear a lady in Spanish reciting some numbers in the background. That is a notorious numbers station which is run by spies giving secret messages. So here they are.
This is Radio Havana, Cuba.
Broadcasting from Cuba, free territory of America. Havana, Cuba begins its broadcast in English for North, Central, and South America and the Caribbean on the 25-meter band at 11,930 kilohertz and on the 19-meter band at 15,300 kilohertz.
Here is a summary of today's broadcast.
First up is Cuban Profile with the top 10 musical hits in our country.
That'll be followed by the Cuban Story, another chapter from the real history of the Cuban people.
Then it's From the Land of Music.
On P.O. Box 7026, we answer the questions our listeners send in.
Next is Latin American Songs.
And we'll wrap things up with the World of Stamps, a feature for philatelists around the world.
That's our schedule for today, Sunday, October 15th, 1983.
Which was a little while ago, and we're going to continue our... we had to sneak that in. That was Radio Havana, Cuba, being interfered with a little early on by Radio Moscow. And I just remembered we do have another Radio Moscow cut that we are going to play. It's one of their surrogate, what I call a surrogate radio station under Radio Moscow's sponsorship. But anyway, we're going to continue our interminable tour of Europe. We're going to get away from Europe pretty soon and just maybe drop a few European ones that we've missed. We've gotten a lot of the major countries, but, you know, we have missed a few. But I think we'll move on to maybe Africa next. And we'll do that pretty soon. We're going to hear Radio Austria signing off, not signing on, signing off. And you'll hear the IS on this.
From me, David Hamges, it's time to close with the usual bugle call.
That's all we have time for today. But our address, as promised, is Austrian Radio, Shortwave Service, A1136, Vienna, Austria. Here in Vienna, it's Elizabeth Blaine reminding you that we're on the air every day at this same time and frequency. So join us again tomorrow.
That concludes the program in English, broadcast every day at the same time by the shortwave service of the Austrian Radio on 5.945 and 9.770 megahertz.
Österreichische Rundfunk Wien. Austria calling from Vienna. Radiodiffusion autrichienne, Vienne. Radio Austria, Vienna. Österreichische Rundfunk Wien. Austria calling from Vienna. Radiodiffusion autrichienne, Vienne.
And we finally get to Radio Moscow here.
Están en la sintonía de Radio Moscú.
Moscow. We're going to give you the complete sign-on here. We teased you with Radio Australia before. And we'll give you the whole thing right here. Pretty neat station. You get it 7 o'clock in the morning.
This is Radio Australia, broadcasting from our studios in Melbourne. At this time, we're calling listeners in Asia, the Pacific, and North America on frequencies of 11800, 9580, 7205, 6045, and 5995 kilohertz in the 25, 31, 41, and 49 meter bands. Following the time signal for 11 hours UTC, we present a bulletin of world news. Here's the time signal for 11 hours UTC.
Here's the world news from Radio Australia, read by Jocelyn Terry.
Yes, one of my sentimental favorites also, Radio Australia. And like I said, you get them at 7 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Time, Eastern Standard Time, or I guess it's 8 o'clock on Daylight Savings Time. And they run that IS for quite a while before they sign on. Coming up next, we teased you with a little of Kol Israel from the Middle East. We'll stray briefly there for a moment. Here's a complete sign-on in English this time. IS and sign-on of Kol Israel, the voice of Israel in Jerusalem, Israel.
This is Israel. Israel Radio, Kol Israel, broadcasting from Jerusalem to North America at 8, 9, and 10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on 11655, 9815, and 7410 kilohertz.
Okay, we've got a little bit of time left on this side of the tape. We're going to give you another good European one here. I think this is Radio Sofia, Bulgaria. And you'll hear the IS and sign on. So stand by for Sofia.
София.
Предаваме за българите в чужбина. After all,
And that should just about wrap up this side of Big's wonderful world of shortwave radio. And we've got a lot of good stuff on the other side as well. We'll be taking a journey down to Africa and out to the far reaches of the world. So you should hear some very interesting things. Stay tuned for side 2 of Big's wonderful world of shortwave radio.
Enterprises to paralyze life in the country at all costs.
On side 2, we'll have a journey to Africa with not as many as I thought we would have, but we've got some weird countries like the country of Gabon, which is Pygmy Land, and Mali, and we'll have an example of a radio transmission from an international shortwave broadcaster directed at Africa, in this case Radio Berlin International, which is East Germany, East Berlin. We gave you the West German one already, Deutsche Welle, and getting back to Deutsche Welle, I mentioned that a lot of these stations use relay stations, and I thought I maybe should tell you where some of them are, because you can always pick up sometimes otherwise unreachable country just because an international broadcaster happens to have a transmitter there. Okay, let's start with the Voice of America, which we haven't even really heard yet. The Voice of America has transmitters in, I believe, California and either North or South Carolina, and maybe one other spot in the continental U.S., but they also have relays all over the place, and I don't know exactly where all of them are, but I know they do have relays on Cyprus, which is an easy way to pick up Cyprus in the Mediterranean. They have one in Sri Lanka, which is that little island off the tip of India, and that's kind of hard to get by itself. And they have one in Monrovia, Liberia. They use ELBC, which is a Monrovian, or should I say a Liberian station for a relay there. They have one in the Philippines, which is, I guess, their Far East relay. And they may have one or two others. Okay, the Canadian Broadcasting Company has a giant transmitter farm. That's what I guess you call it, a farm. In fact, that's what they do call them. They have a transmitter and an antenna farm in Sackville, New Brunswick, which is right in the backyard, literally speaking, for us here in New Hampshire. And both the BBC and Deutsche Welle, or Deutsche Welle, I've been calling it Deutsche Welle most of the time, use that as a relay. Deutsche Welle also has a relay in Malta, which we heard earlier, and they have one in Montserrat in the Caribbean. Radio France International uses relays in French Guiana on the north coast of South America, and they use the Africa number 1 relay at Africa number 1 in Gabon in Africa. Let's see, who else? Okay, Radio Japan has also been using Africa number 1 as a relay from Gabon, but they have had problems with their satellite link, so that hasn't been working too well. Radio Nederland uses, as I said, relays in Bonaire in the Netherlands Antilles and Madagascar, and they might have another one. I don't think they do, though. Getting back to Radio Japan, however, Radio Japan is also planning one in Panama, which would be a great bonus for shortwave listeners because there is no shortwave from Panama. There has not been for quite a while. But anyway, to less mundane matters, we're going to take you out of side 1 with It's not coming in too well, I guess. Maybe that's because the antenna is coiled in my lap. Let's see if we can get it better. Radio Norway.
Dette Norge. This is Radio Norway International.
Shortwave, 9 different English languages.
Norge. This is Radio Norway International.
Because we also have like the which is also este momento también unos oyentes que hablan español, puedo decir que tenemos una transmisión que se llama La Historia de la Alegría. Which is our address in Spanish, and we always like people to write to us because it's always
Dette Norge. This is Radio Norway International. Dette Norge. This is Radio Norway International.